Hi. First of all, short apologies. My voice might be a bit harsh because I have a terrible cold, but I do my very best to keep you through this talk. Okay, let me start telling you a little bit about my pets. They are amazing creatures. They are strong, they are enduring, but at the same time, they are dynamic and sometimes full of surprises. They have really cool strategies to cope with stress. But they are endangered, so they need your help. What I'm talking about is these guys here, these forest trees. Throughout evolution, trees have evolved amazing strategies to cope with all kinds of stresses. But nowadays, with global change, we see a lot of mortality, and unfortunately, this is happening globally. So what's different now? Well, consider these guys here, they are about 80 to 100 years old. They have seen hot summers in their life. But now, during climate change, things are changing in a velocity which has never been happening before. So now we have novel conditions which those trees are not adapted to because these droughts are way more severe, they are hotter, and they are more frequent. And maybe the velocity with these extreme events is too fast for these long-lived creatures to adapt. So this is not just a problem in the global south or in very arid countries. This is a problem right here. We have seen this in 2018 with the severe droughts where really even our keystone species, like the beeches in the temperate forest, showed severe signs of stress and canopy dieback. And I brought you an example from a site near Freiburg where we have been studying these nice pine forests, which was growing steadily before the first severe droughts hit in, and this is how it looked the year after. Many, many dead trees. You can see it here from above. You see these dead crowns. But we also see something changing in this forest. And interestingly, in the understory, we have new tree species flourishing. So currently we don't know, does this forest change into something different? Or does this just decay because the pine trees are just dying? And why is this so different? And so different now and so important? On these tower structures, which you can see here, we can measure how much carbon these systems actually accumulate. And what we've seen that under these severe droughts, the system are actually releasing carbon. And that is really important globally because with all these fossil fuel emissions which drive climate change, actually from everything we are emitting, and this year again, an all-time high, only a fraction is ending up in the atmosphere. Because both the terrestrial vegetation and the oceans are taking a large part of this carbon, and they are protecting us from even more severe climate change impacts. But this can only happen when the forests are well watered. So normally, during photosynthesis, trees take up an enormous sum of carbon, and that can be used for above-ground growth, or it can be funneled through your trunk into your root system, into the soils. But what happens when there is drought stress? Trees have to avoid desiccation, so they close their somatopore, but then they lose their transpirational cooling. And they are exposed to this really high radiation, which can burn your leaf. And in this case, they have many strategies, and one of them is to build protective compounds, such as volatile organic compounds, which are released in the atmosphere. And that is not so new. That has actually been described as the blue haze. And this is something maybe all of you have already observed. On a hot summer day over a forested area, you will see that the air gets very hazy. And these are thousands of different molecules emitted by trees. So why do trees do that? Well, first of all, it protects them against heat and drought. But at the same time, when you are stressed, you might be more susceptible to some predators, like, for example, herbivores. And here, trees can actually produce compounds which make their leaf less palatable. Or even better, they can send out signals to call for help, some predators like a wasp, which will then feed on your herbivore. Or you can call in a really strong predator which can feed on thousands of your enemies, like, for example, this little ladybug can feed on 10,000 aphids. And what's even more fascinating, it's not just the tree itself, which is actually having these protections, but it's also all these surrounding trees, which send these signals and also upregulate their defenses. So it's an effective tool of plant communication. Now we can measure these signals, and they're very nice tracers to tell us about a plant response to stress. But what is really hard to measure is under drought stress we have less carbon, and now there is that trade-off. How much carbon does the tree invest into protective mechanism? How much is left for growth or goes below ground? And this is really hard to trace, but here we can use a trick. We can use stable isotope traces. Stable isotopes are not radioactive, they're just naturally abundant in the environment. And I actually like to work a lot with stable isotopes because they tell you a lot of cool things about processes. For example, I could take a hair sample of everyone here in the room, run the analysis, and I could tell you straight away who is vegan, vegetarian, or who is the top predator feeding on meat and beef. So lots of hidden things you can see with stable isotope, but we can also use them in tracer experiment as they are not dangerous. And we can feed plants with stable isotopes and then see how this carbon partitioning in the plant is happening. Now you can do this in the lab with a small enclosure. You put your plant, you feed it, it's a very cool experiment. But we want to understand what's happening in the forest. And in the forest is more than a plant in a pot. We have interactions between the trees. They share resources. They might compete for resources. For example, when it gets drier and water is limiting. So how do we study this in forests? It's very hard to put a forest in an enclosure. But very luckily, there's one place on Earth where we have exactly that. And that's the Biosphere 2 in Arizona. And this dome-shaped enclosure has a tropical rainforest. And that's a cool site to do an experiment because it was built in the 90s to see if mankind would survive on its own, so you can hermetically seal it. So there we were off and say like, hey, let's do a really global climate change type drought and see how this forest will react. Well, a lot of people think we scientists just need to have brilliant ideas and do cool experiments and then you get nice data. Well, I tell you, our everyday life is quite different. Most of the time, the things you actually need don't even exist. Then funding is always limited. You have to somehow find cheap solutions, build everything yourself. But here, this huge experiment which we set off to do with many, many scientists, we were running in very unexpected trouble. We had planned everything a year, we had shipped our equipment to the US, and then nothing arrived. Weeks and weeks. And when it finally arrived, it was hand-delivered, but unfortunately it came in pieces. And there you are with your brilliant ideas, and first thing you have to do is repair and start everything on a run. So big teams helping, we built small cuvettes, we built trunk enclosures, we put out 4 kilometers of Teflon line into this tubing. We even built an instrument shed, which first was empty and then was so crowded we could hardly move. And in the end, we had the full forest connected from the treetops with tree climates down to the stems, the soils, even digging pits in the soil. And we sent the whole thing into a long drought. And then there was our exciting day where we did the trace experiment. And what everybody here is so excited about is this tiny little bottle because it contains 50,000 euros of 13 CO2. And you can imagine the moment I opened that bottle, it was like, whew, let's hope everything worked well. And it did. So what did we learn? Now photosynthesis took up this label, and now we can trace how much of that label was used for defense in these volatiles. And actually what we saw is the carbon allocation into volatiles remained high all through drought, which tells us how important that protective function is. What we also saw under drought was amazing that everything slowed down. So even below ground carbon allocation slowed down, and the mean residence time of carbon turnover increased. What does that mean? During drought, the trees have less carbon, but they can work with it for more longer time period. Now, the forest looked very different. Some trees were terribly stressed, some looked quite okay, some shed their leaves. Question is why? Maybe some are deep-rooted, some are shallow-rooted, some don't reach the water. Here again, you can do a nice trace experiment because you can also use the labeled water. And in the biosphere, you can actually reach the bottom of the forest in the basement and just add this label to the drainage pipe and see who takes it up. Well, at least this is what Joost was telling us here. Turned out the biosphere is quite leaky, so we spent 3 days and nights working at Plumbers because that expensive label was just dripping out on us and we were trying to push it back in and you never were sure if that had actually worked out. So again, we weren't too sure. We were waiting for the signal in the transpiration. Now consider, we have a super droughted forest, 9.5 weeks. What would you expect? Well, I at least expected that those trees which could reach the water would start transpiring as crazy. But this is not what we saw. One single tree started to have the transpiration in 2 days, which was good because we know we didn't lose all the expensive tracer. For all the others, it took weeks and weeks. So what happened? Well, actually we figured out they first refilled their trunk. And so the label was stored, and it seems to refill this water storage was more important than to open stomata and start photosynthesis again. And some species did this more continuously. So again, a huge variety of responses. And because they responded so differently, some reducing the transpiration early, actually the whole system was protected from running dry. So what did we learn? The high diversity of these different adaptations of these trees increased the drought resilience to climate change. Now, at the beginning, I told you we want to understand how to study our forests here. The biosphere is a very particular case, and you can't put something so complicated into a natural forest. So what can we do? And this is where we thought we need to go new ways to measure these different responses, because it's so important we learn to understand our forests better. And here was the idea. You have sensors everywhere, in your phone, in your car, in your home. Why not use this knowledge of sensor technology to investigate stuff in the forest? And this is what we set up to do. So the idea is to create a smart autonomous sensing networks. And I'm leading this together with Ulrike Wallrabe, and she is a microsystem engineer. So we teamed up between these two disciplines and see if we can't not develop small types of sensors and put them out in the forest. And this is what we're actually doing now. So this is this very nice mixed forest. It's at the Black Forest foothill. And we really want to understand how this forest interacts. We have these tall towers where we can again measure the CO2 uptake and release on the forest and study these processes. And now the forest is full of sensors, and we are starting to put out these new sensors. For example, these little leaf cuvettes, which you can just clamp on the leaf with a little magnet and then connect it to your instrument. So our vision is that we find new ways to study the response of forests by using smart sensor networks. And of course, they need to be energy autonomous. So you don't have to put long cables. They should be low cost, so you can measure many of these. And then you want to see what's really happening in your forest. So what you want is also to get your data directly into an online database. So currently we have over 3,000 data streams coming in as an early warning system what's happening in this forest. And in the end, we also want to use an AI-based approach to model and forecast these effects in the forest. Now, it's very hard to predict where these next extreme droughts will happen, right? Could be here, could be somewhere else. So our vision in this EcoSense project is that we create a low-cost and mobile system in the end, which gives us the possibility to react to take this to wherever the next big drought will happen and try to understand these processes in the forest better. And it's my real belief that this knowledge is important to make our forests more climate resilient. But we will not save the forests with science alone. Our forests need protection, and this is where I need your help. Because the only way to protect the forest in the long run is to see that this increase of climate extremes is not happening, and the very simple way to do this is by reducing your carbon footprint. We have the technologies, we have the know-how, we can make the change, and we are over 8 billion people on this planet. If everybody makes a bit of a difference, we can change a lot of things. And this is not just about how you travel day by day. This is about what you eat. I don't want to convince anybody to turn into a vegan, but consider how much meat consumption per week is really required. Maybe you can make a change here. It has a huge impact on your carbon footprint. And maybe you're like, hey, I'm good. I don't have a car, I don't have money for long-distance flights anyway, I'm fine. But did you consider what you consume and where you buy? Are you the person ordering on Temu or other platforms and everything is flown over from the other side of the world? Do you check where your fruits come from? Are they flown over from New Zealand or do you buy local? This has an enormous imprint on your carbon footprint. Be aware of your lifestyle. And there are things which are easy to change, which don't cost much. But of course, we also need political action. And I must say it's an embarrassment that I'm here in a country where I believe that science has a value and facts are important, seeing politicians still ignoring climate change. For me as a scientist, that hurts. But still, we can make a change. Votes are coming up here and elsewhere. Take your voice, take your vote, make that change. Our forests need protection because in the end, they will protect us. Thank you.